Okay, so first, can you tell us about what you do here, just in general?
So Crossroads for Women, we have like different services and programs. We're well known for our shelter. We have 41 beds available for like temporary housing for women and families fleeing domestic violence. But we also offer like outreach services, so either workshops in schools or intervention counseling to women that fled relationship but still want to work on their trauma or action plans. We have a sexual assault center, so really specific on addressing the trauma associated to sexual violence. We do accompaniment to the hospital, court system, police. We have a few apartment units, so we can rent out for to give like a more permanent housing to survivors of violence, but also women who live with addiction or mental health issues. So those are some of our programs. We have like a child and youth program, we have a crisis line, but I think like everything related to violence, we kind of offer something to address the different facet that comes with it. Yeah.
So, cut this part out, but do you want to go next?
Yeah, we were wondering with the money that we raise, where would it be going like specifically?
I think it would be going specifically to our shelter. We offer daily programming, so it could be workshops about like self-esteem or how to write a resume, addiction, but we also offer things like art therapy. So we don't have any funding for that specifically, either to develop the programs, but also if we have to buy art supplies or make photocopies and give journals, or so without like those kinds of funding, we wouldn't be able to actually give back and hand out things to the residents while they do that programming. So usually we have a workshop every day, and a few times a week we have multiple workshops, and we also offer some group programs in the community, so that money can help buy like material for those workshops.
So how many women a year, of women and families, do you help?
Last year we welcomed 250 women and 95 children, and this year I don't have the exact stats, but it's more than 270 women and 120 some children at the shelter. We also have multiple families in our apartment units. We have outreach clients. Just at the hospital, we accompanied more than 90 victims and survivors of violence. So it all adds up, but yeah, we do interact with a lot of survivors of violence and children. Yeah.
Are you usually pretty like full, like the beds?
Yes, we find that with community funding, we're able to actually give like programs, so it helps the women reach their goals faster. So we can, if they find housing and they don't need our immediate support, well, that's a bed that we can offer to someone else. We used to have more than 30% of refusal rates because our beds were full and we couldn't welcome any more people, but now we're seeing that we can help, like offer a really good support when they're here so that they don't have to stay as long, and we can have a bed for someone else. But to answer specifically, yes, our beds are usually full, but when people call, we really try to find a way that we can like bring them in and offer the safety and the support they need. Yeah.
So what got you involved in this type of work?
So me personally, well, I'm a feminist. I've always been interested when it comes to women's issue and attaining equality. And when I say services for women, it's like a really inclusive term. So we do welcome cis women, trans women, non-binary folks, gender non-confirming, and some of our more like community programs like outreach and the sexual assault center, we do offer supports to men as well that are survivors of violence. But it came from that standpoint of seeing oppression and injustice and wanting to offer my support. So I've always been involved in the field of like advocating against like or for sexual violence survivors, and then went on with like domestic violence survivors.
Does anybody else have more questions they want to ask? No? Okay, kind of unprepared.
That's okay.
Trying to think.
Well, maybe I can talk about like what the community can do when it
Yeah,
comes to
yeah,
the-
sure.
Oh, yeah.
So when it comes to like issues surrounding like violence against women or just violence in general, like what can the community do? I think fundraising and giving us like money so we can really like, we know best what's the need and what we can buy, but we also have people that come in with donations of like toothpaste or like toilet paper is a big thing. Like, can you imagine 41 beds, how many toilet paper we use a day? So like that's always something that's useful. Like please call beforehand and we'll have a list of what we need. Volunteering is also a big thing, like having people coming here helping like with the supper, for example, so our interveners can focus on supporting clients instead of like making supper. We also have volunteers that accompany survivors of violence when they go to the hospital. So those are all like different ways of helping out. And if you don't have time or money to support us, just like talking about violence and being like an ambassador of like healthy relationship and of consent, like it makes a difference. Like calling out someone when they say something disrespectful, or hearing like a rape joke and saying like that's not funny, or just like being an open ear of someone disclosing that they've been a victim of violence and telling them it's not your fault, do not feel guilt, I believe you, and just giving them the resources to our center. I think that's something that everyone can do, no matter their resources.
Do you get any government funding?
We do. Some of our programs, like the Sexual Assault Center, we do not receive any government, or a really tiny percentage of government funding. Other programs are a bit more well-funded, like the Child and Youth Support Program. But without support from the community, we would not be able to survive. Definitely, it's a big portion of our budget that comes from the community. Mm-hmm.
What got this place started?
Well, it started like in 1980. A group of women just got together and realized like there was no shelter in the greater Moncton area, and even like in other provinces, it's kind of the year that women just got together and said like we need to do something. Women are not leaving abusive relationships because they don't have a place to go where they can feel safe. So it came from there. When I started working a few years ago, we had a shelter at another location. We had 17 beds, and our refusal rates were really, really high. So community got together and we were able to raise funds to buy this bigger shelter where we have more beds, but also a bigger kitchen, places where we can have the programming, a counseling room, etc. So that's like the short story of where we were in 1980 and where we are now, almost 40 years later. Mm-hmm.
How long do women and their families typically stay here?
I'd say it's different for everyone. Like we have some women, for example, they are in Moncton right now, but they have safe family members, let's say in the peninsula. So they only need a place to stay for like 2 days, a safe place where they feel like they won't be a victim of violence, and then they get their things together, they're able to find a transport to go to their family. We have other women, they want to stay in Moncton, it's just like finding a safe place, but within a month, 30 days, they're able to find an apartment, raise the money to pay for like damage deposit and all of that. We have like more complex cases where like it takes more time. If it's refugee women or a claimant that lived violence in her country that needs to claim for like a refugee status and then get her Medicare card and ID and all of that, or a homeless woman that came from nothing, that doesn't have income to pay for an apartment. Well, those things can take more time, or if it's a really complex trauma, we don't have a time limit. Like people that come here that really work on their action plan, we find a way to keep them for as long as they need, and to make sure that they're safe when they they go back in the community, yes.
So is there like a building like this in most communities around New Brunswick, or is this kind of like a exceptional case of like?
We have transition house in different cities or region in New Brunswick. Crossroads for women is definitely the biggest. We have the more beds. It's a big city. We have people that are fleeing kind of their villages or their city to come here. We have people out of the province that come to Moncton to really make sure they're far away from the abuse they lived. So we really welcome like different kind of people, and that's why we have a big shelter with like sexual assault centers. There's only 3 in the province, and I think that's something that we need to build more elsewhere, because like as we see like more than 90 victims just at the hospital, and that's without the people that do counseling and all of that. So it's a big need. So I'd say there are some services that are specific to our our organization, but others that is like shelters are happening in it all over province.
I was just wondering, just because this past year it's been a big topic, like the MeToo movement, stuff like that. You noticed like a change, of, like just from all that, like talking about it more?
Yeah, well, I'd say our sexual assault center really opened its door in 2017, so that's kind of with the Me Too movement. So I don't have like a before Me Too and now, but yes, we do see like every year we have more people calling either in crisis or going to the hospital and asking for counseling sessions. And even in schools, I find like the way we talk about that issue has changed. Like when we say consent, people kind of have an idea of what we're talking about. Now, is it applied? Like I think there's still work to do, but yes, I'd say that we talk about it more, and that survivors are accessing services more and more. And I'd say survivors like under the age of like maybe 40. So I think we still have work to do to make sure that all the population is kind of conscious about that issue and feels safe asking for services.
So I've heard you talk a little bit about the action plan. Could you just explain that a little bit more?
So really we're like client-centered. We use a client-centered approach, so that means that we start from where the resident or the person we work with, where she wants to go. So what's her need? Usually, like if it's the transition house, finding housing could be something. So okay, we'll sit together, what can we put in place so that you're able to find housing? If it's, I have anxiety attack, okay, what coping mechanism can we implement that are healthy for you to cope with your anxiety attack? Or it could be, I want to find a job, I want to finish my GED, whatever those goals are. We really try to empower the people we're working with so that they find the solutions, but that we accompany them and that we advocate on their behalf. So if it's making a call somewhere to make sure they have access to our service, if it's giving them handouts and tools so they can practice in their alone time, whatever, but that's what we mean about the action plan. It's different for every person we work with.
I was just wondering, because the shelter's address isn't publicized, how are women in need able to like find it and find the help they need?
There's a couple of different ways. We receive more than 2,000 crisis calls a year, so that's, I think, the biggest way that people contact us. And when we do have more information, we give them our address. Others are words of mouth. I've been to Crossroads before. I'm noticing you're in an abusive relationship. Hey, I'll drive you. You can meet with the interveners. Other service providers that give our address so that, or bring people here. We have requests over like Facebook message all the time. We have an email address too, because like sometimes calling is not safe, but maybe texting or Facebook messaging could be easier. So those are all different ways that people get to know where we're situated.
I was just, because women may feel unsure, like what to expect when to come here, what would be normally the first thing that they should expect when coming here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, we have a door that you ring. Most of the time we know that someone is coming, so we'll just welcome them to our intake room. We take the time to just listen to their story. So, and after that we do the paperwork, let's say like, what's your name, what's your date of birth, things like that. But at first we want to make sure that they tell us their story and that we answer their questions. Like some of them, like, is food provided? Yes, food is provided. You're in charge of making your own like breakfast and lunch, but we make supper for you, for example. Is there like a laundry machine? Yes, there is. I have children. So just making sure that we answer all the questions. Another question that we get asked is, can I get out? And yes, people are like, they can go in and out. They want to go to the convenience store, have coffee with a friend. We just need to know so that if we don't hear back, well, we'll put like a safety mechanism in place. So we just answer the questions and then we do an intake. We do give a tour of the shelter, and there's always interveners 24/7 here. So if they have a question, they want toothpaste, they are in a crisis and really need like a listening ear, well, we're always there for them. So that would kind of be like the first few minutes, hours of their process. Yeah.
While there are children here, do they continue to go to their regular schools, or do they do their school here, or what happens with that?
It's really up to the mom. Most of them, they do go to school. We have a partnership with the different districts that they pay for transport. So let's say that their school is not in our region, well, usually they can get like safe transport back and forth to their school. We have lots of children that are that are less than 4 years old, let's say. So
okay.
They stay here. We have child and youth workers, so there's like story time, play therapy. We also work with the moms if they have like questions about parenting skills, or like if it's their first child and they have like questions about breastfeeding, whatever the questions could be. We really try to be there to support them and give them resources for parenting.
Think we have enough, Alan?
Yeah. Almost 20 minutes. So. Yeah.
Probably for sure. Well, thank you so much for
You're welcome.
answering questions and everything.
Yeah, it's nice.